Hello, today's topic slightly strays from the energy agenda, though it's directly linked. Today we discuss the rare earth metals market and Russian prospects with Alexander Bylkin, Strategy and Transformation Director at Implementa. Hello, Alexander. Good afternoon, Oleg. I'd like to begin with a question about defining rare earth metals. In Russia, they're often linked with rare metals. How justified is this link, and which metals are meant by this term? Yes, that's a great question. Indeed, starting with basic terminology is right. Let's consider how the average person might perceive this. Well, rare earths or some rare ones, it means there are few of them. There's a lot of buzz around them. Some political negotiations, meaning everyone needs them. But since there are few and they are needed, it means they are very valuable, that is, expensive. What does few mean? Yes, this concept of rarity, yes? For example, you can take the parameter of this element's content in the Earth's crust. For instance, 5% iron and 7% aluminium, or 8%, is contained in the Earth's crust. That is, in every 100 kilos of earth, yes, there, sand, well, 5 kilos of iron, 7 of aluminium. Well, it doesn't seem, yes, like something rare. And indeed, it seems the agenda doesn't mention this. Gold is found in, let's say, 0.01%. So if a deposit has, say, 2 grams per ton, that's actually not bad. And with rare earth elements, it's roughly the same. That is, they also make up some small fractions of a percent. They converge here. Let's move on. About 3,000 tons of gold are mined annually. As for rare earth elements, roughly speaking, it's about 300 to 400 depending, 300 to 400,000 tons. So there's a difference of 2 orders of magnitude. That's the first point. Second, 1 kilogram of gold costs $100,000, and 1 kilogram of neodymium or praseodymium, typical rare earth elements, costs $100 per kilogram. So the difference is several orders of magnitude. Well, that's what it comes to. So these elements aren't that rare compared to gold, platinum, and some others. Therefore, the concept of rarity shouldn't be overestimated or taken as absolute. Here, again, from the content perspective, there are no special differences. Rare earths, yes, they are. They are grouped by chemical properties. What does this mean in practice? So, for one molecule of a rare earth element, there are 3 molecules of oxygen, right? There, they all form such compounds. And in this way, they combine. But this doesn't mean you should include this group with all 17 metals, right? That they are all equally useful, equally needed. Literally 4 elements, not 1, praseodymium, dysprosium, and a couple more, are of real market interest. So, these 3 account for 80 or 90% of total consumption. So the rest is, roughly speaking, like a Mendeleev's table, which is even hard to learn. There is a concept of rare elements. These are indeed the ones that are not widely spread. Well, these aren't rare earths, right? Because it's more about prevalence. But again, their quantity, yes, doesn't mean that a small amount doesn't mean they are in demand. Alexander, in recent years, with the energy transition, the rare earth metals market has been constantly growing. What scale has it reached today, and what are the expert assessments of its near-term prospects? Indeed, now, if we talk about the metals market as a whole, which includes iron, aluminium, copper, gold, etc., this market is now stagnating somewhere, growing slightly elsewhere, on average. What's the reason for this? It's because over 50% of metal consumption, actually from 50 to 80, even 90 for some metals, is concentrated in China. And China's economy now, let's say, isn't exactly stagnating, but it's not growing as expected. And amidst this stagnation, a group of metals stands out, or there's a term, especially established in Western companies, critical minerals. Besides rare earth elements, these include cobalt, lithium, nickel, and copper. I point this out because, for instance, about 200 to 300,000 tons of cobalt and lithium are consumed annually, while copper is 25 million. Yes, and rare earth elements are also 300 to 400,000. So copper seems a lot, but consumption growth is quite high. You asked, there was also a question, just a bridge expression. Metals are all different, all priced differently, yes. Roughly speaking, copper costs $10,000 per ton, not $100,000 per ton, and gold is millions per ton. Yet these are all metals, and metallurgical companies deal with them. And all this can be summed up not by tons, but by money. So rare earth elements altogether occupy less than 0.5% of the entire market, yes. Iron, well, and steel, yes, that's half. Of the metals market or less. Of the metals market as a whole, yes. Right. If we talk about critical minerals in general, including things like thread, it's about 25–27%. And this group is the main driver of the entire market. That's why the focus of global and Russian companies is precisely on this growing segment, yes. And, say, copper in the long term will grow by about 1.5. Long term is until 2050, yes. That's roughly 1.5 to 2% per year. And approximately for cobalt, for nickel, it's about 3, around 3. Yes, for lithium. Well, they say up to 7. So now lithium is experiencing explosive growth. Yes, rare earths, also roughly like lithium, so also about 3 to 4%. Alexander, but still, if we take a simple mass volume, I would probably refer to some authoritative source like Bloomberg. Yes, they determine the market volume for the coming years to be about $7 to $8 billion, considering the total weight of this group. So, with the prospects, as you rightly said about lithium, so to speak, by 2030 it is expected, so to speak, to almost double this volume. 8 billion is mentioned. Is this a real figure? It's more than a real figure, but again, these 9 and 15 billion, maybe even more, yes, it's still in comparison to 1 trillion. Understood. Of the entire market, yes. So, look, here's an important story. It's an interesting niche. Correct, but let's say large metallurgical companies can't make a big business out of it. And here it's worth adding another point that few understand. The fact is, for China, which is a global consumer and producer of all this electronics, supermagnets, well, all this technology, for them all these metals are pure raw materials. All the value is further along. So they earn money further along. Yes, so the market may be growing, the demand for metals is growing, but what this means for resource companies is not entirely clear now. You mentioned China and its dominant position in this market. And I would like to clarify in the future whether its monopoly position in this market will remain, as today, as a rule setter, or is there a trend that other players will appear here? My subjective assessment is that might appear who can try to pull part of this business onto themselves, but probably the situation won't change drastically.
Но, наверное, кардинально ситуация не изменится. Смотрите, давайте...
Look, let's just move on to some numbers. Lithium, cobalt. China consumes primarily for batteries about 80 to 90% of the world's total. The same goes for rare earth elements.
То же самое по
Right.
редкоземельным элементам. Вот. И
And here, sometimes the question arises, well, could Russia? Yes, but we lost some competencies since the Soviet Union. Well, then you could say, then the whole world lost or never gained these competencies.
Потому что, еще раз,
Because, again, if we now refer specifically to rare earths, to that strange group, then depending on the technological stage, China occupies. China plus Taiwan occupy about 90%, the USA from 1 to 10% by stages, and some other countries, some small percentage shares. What's wrong in the USA? Yes, it would seem, the largest economy in the world, yes? What's wrong there with Europe, with Germany? Well, not right, yes? And not right, in fact, is very simple. So this market is formed by demand, yes? China is a global factory for all sorts of technology. Yes, electronics, right. And as I said, the value is created there. And to compete, you need to understand, firstly, where this competition is possible. If a country has reserves, then in any case, these reserves are mined in that country, not in China. Although in China 50% or more of the explored reserves, that is, maybe in Russia too. In Russia, it's about 10% of the world's, maybe more, just needs further exploration. But it's important that first these reserves need to be extracted, then enriched to get the concentrate. Because in the ORE it's 1%, and accordingly there's a lot of waste rock. It needs to be increased to several tens of percent. But then the hardest part begins. Because first you need to produce a pure product, a pure complex of these rare earth elements. Then they need to be separated into individual oxides and then produce metal. And this metal can already be used for some final products, for the same microchips, super strong magnets, but all these specific applications. But just to produce metal, billion-dollar investments are needed.
Нужны миллиардные инвестиции.
Many billions, and the market volume is minimal. In the USA, rare earth elements are mined, but they send them to China for processing. And then they get something back for the production of microchips there. Alexander, I would like to address our topic, especially since you have already touched on it. It is known that the USSR had the third largest reserves of rare earth metals in the world, and a complete technological chain from ore extraction, processing, to separation into oxides and these semi-finished products.
До разделения на оксиды и вот эти вот полуфабрикаты, да?
In the post-Soviet period, after the collapse of the Union, the competencies in separation are considered lost. Production remained in Estonia, production remained in Kazakhstan, and so on. Do you agree, firstly, with this assessment? And secondly, how possible is it today to talk about restoring these competencies and creating distribution productions here? As I said, even the United States of America now sends its concentrate to China for processing. Although the states have radically different opportunities for investment and access to technology, capital markets, and so on. Therefore, the scale effect is important here. The scale effect is 1, and 2, understanding that the main value is formed already in the final product. One must objectively relate to reality. In Russia, there is no such scale of consumption and no such scale of processing. And it is unlikely to be in the foreseeable future. And that's normal because the whole world is arranged like that. I would rather think about what could be done in such conditions.
The
Russian Federation today actually exports concentrate and imports finished products. And even its need for rare earth metals, which may be small, may indeed not be large enough, as you say. but it satisfies it only through imports. Is it possible in the foreseeable future to change this situation, at least to the extent that the Russian Federation would satisfy its need for high-value-added products independently?
Короткий ответ – нет.
The short answer is no, and there's no point in thinking about it. Moreover, I will develop this topic. You know, when I attend some events dedicated to rare earth elements, there is such a message from producers, owners of deposits, subsoil users, let's say, to the state. Help us get this business on its feet. Because the Chinese, such scoundrels, even for the concentrate offer such small money, and for already separate components, already divided, such small money that our projects do not pay off. You see,
отдельные там компоненты, да, уже разделенные, такие маленькие деньги, что у нас проекты не окупаются. Так в этом-то как бы
it didn't happen by chance. China, deliberately using its position, is interested in keeping raw material prices, even very high value-added ones, minimal. I will refer to the example of cobalt and Congo. The Chinese are building their capacities, mining their mines in Congo. They create a colossal surplus there. Prices collapse by half.
Профицит колоссальный. Цены обрушиваются в 2 раза. Да, добычные проекты.
Yes, the Chinese mining projects do not pay off investments, but on the other hand, China itself, as the largest consumer, gets half the price in the long run.
Долгой перспективе.
Понятно.
Alexander, today it is known that in the new territories to the Russian Federation, those territories that the Russian Federation controls today, the so-called Shevchenko lithium deposit has been transferred. Is its development possible in the near future? After all, in principle, such a deposit can even be, so to speak, the basis for the revival of these territories in terms of production. What do you think?
Ну, моя позиция следующая, да.
Well, my position is as follows. Yes, that new territories are not a turning point in the development of the industry. Yes, the meteorological one, related to critical minerals. Here's the thing, yes. Well, for example, lithium reserves in Russia,
Запасы лития в России.
they are there, according to various estimates, from 1 to 3.5 million tons, given that global consumption is now 200,000 tons. Yes, Australia, the largest producer, is 50,000 tons per year. Yes, that is, if we imagine that we will achieve the level of Australia, then according to the minimum estimates, these reserves will last us for decades, if we can develop them.
Но
But something is wrong here. That is, metallurgical companies, I myself, as a former metallurgical company employee, know that companies are always looking for where to invest money. Because projects always end, mines are depleted. You need to move on. So, and well, most likely, it has already been somehow calculated, somehow evaluated, yes, and these huge reserves, incomparably large, with some of our new acquisitions, there is no clear plan for them, yes, because they are trying to do Rosatom polity, even with Norilsk nickel, but there is no concreteness, no really ready productions. Therefore, to think that now, you know, some magic wand, yes, can change this situation, well, in general, I would not count on it.
я бы не стал так на это рассчитывать.
Последнее время очень много.
Recently, there has been a lot of talk about cooperation between the United States of America and the Russian Federation in the development of rare earth metals. The topic was also raised in negotiations in Saudi Arabia, and in this context, the sector is generally seen as a pilot cooperation area for restoring relations, similar to the Apollo-Soyuz program during the Cold War. So please tell me, in your expert opinion, is the rare earth metal sector viable for cooperation today?
Возможно сегодня для взаимодействия сторон?
Это может быть один из компонентов.
It might be one of the important components. Here's the thing, as we've discussed before, raising certain productions and making them economically viable is probably a complex task, especially since Americans always count their money and prefer to invest in truly profitable projects. By the way, this is a very advantageous trait of theirs. Western culture, business, is very favorably distinguished from the Chinese, because when they enter resource-rich countries, they are interested in simply setting up production, but its economic viability doesn't concern them. Quite the opposite. It's better if it doesn't make money, so they can just take the resources. Regarding Americans and rare earth elements, I'd say this. Indeed, there's some uncertainty now. What will the future demand volume be? Yes, it will grow. Yes, reserves aren't everywhere. There are literally 5 countries in the world, half of which is China, with significant reserves.
Из которых половина Китай, да? Вот, где есть там, ну, действительно существенные запасы. Возможно, в будущем...
In the future, the very fact of having guaranteed access to these reserves is a very important negotiating
Это
point.
очень важный аргумент переговорный, да? Но...
But the question is, what can we ask for in return?
Давайте разрабатывать это конкретное месторождение.
That is to say, let's develop this particular deposit. That's probably not quite working now. But what might work? I think the answer is obvious. For example, Russia is, I believe, 3rd in the world in copper reserves.
Да? У нас есть гигантские...
We have giant deposits, like the Udokan copper, which is also among the top 5 largest in the world. Currently, it operates at about 100 or so thousand tons a year, but it could be expanded to 300 or more.
Но для этого нужно финансирование.
But for that, funding is needed, technology is needed. In general, it requires a lot of resources. And the thread, seemingly not the hottest topic for discussion.
Для обсуждения. Но, возможно,
But perhaps in exchange for some guarantees of long-term supply of rare earth elements, like lithium, cobalt, or whatever, we could request funding, a good project, and involve our contractors, our local manufacturers in building a new plant.
Наших подрядчиков, наших местных производителей в постройку нового завода. Да, проект...
Yes, the project will be Western, the basic technology Western, but maximally involve our suppliers, manufacturers, so they learn to create their own. In expert circles, it's often mentioned that the Tamtor deposit in Yakutia is being discussed as a potential area of cooperation between the Russian Federation and the United States of America. It's a fairly large class of deposits, rich in various metals. Could you comment on this situation? Is it realistic or not? It's a kind of formation of a positive agenda. We used to sit and not know how to move it from a dead point, and now a solution has appeared.
Не знали, как вот сдвинуть все это с мертвой точки.
How is it really? Maybe it's indeed a very good initiative and will yield excellent results. Maybe not.
Может быть, это действительно очень хорошая инициатива и даст нам великолепные плоды. Может быть, и нет. На самом деле, как бы ответ, он такой же, как и всегда.
In fact, the answer is the same as always. In mining, it's rare to know exactly what's underground. You don't fully know how it will be processed into a specific metal. There are many uncertainties. The industry is terribly rigid. Investment projects last for decades. Well, on one hand, time will tell. On the other hand, the more such initiatives, the more geological exploration, some preliminary metallurgy, designing and such plans, the more of them, the greater the chance that at some opportune moment we can play a trump card under certain circumstances. Thank you.